Welcome back to the channel. Thank y'all for hanging with me on this Wednesday. So are tungsten jigs worth the extra amount of money that you're going to spend on them? Because I think a normal jig, somewhere around $4 or $5, a tungsten jig, $10. So is it worth it? And for me, what can it do that a lead jig can't do? That's really what is going to separate the two, why I'm going to pay the extra $5 or $6, because I really need something in a situation that I just can't get fulfilled by that lead jig. So I really keep it to about 3 or 4 different types of jigs, depending on how you look at them. I like vertical line ties anytime I'm getting bites on the fall. So that's typically going to be around steeper structure or cover that may have fish suspended in it, or I really got to drop that bait through something like grass or maybe big laydowns, big pieces of wood where they're right in the heart of it and they're maybe a little deeper water, 4 or 5 feet. I got to pitch right, and I think a lot of those fish are just sitting right underneath the branches. Nice one. Or I'm catching fish on the bottom. So it could be fish that may be about to spawn. They're hunkering around the wood, like on docks or stumps, and I'm just pitching that bait around those pieces of cover, shaking it. I like the horizontal line tie whenever I'm fishing for bass that are in that mode. So where does the tungsten jig fit into this? And I think of like smallmouth fishing. I know that little football head with the Ned bait on there with no weed guard is kind of taking the smallmouth lakes by storm. And I've also seen that this smaller grass jig, like the Beast Coast Little Magnum, is showing up in a lot of those top 10 baits for the tournament. So I take heed of that, and I've been flipping it out here for a couple weeks now. And I will say this, that the jig for me is a bait that, hot or cold, you can have the best day of anyone on the lake, or you can come in with no fish or maybe 1 or 2 and they just weren't on the jig that day. So anytime I can figure out a way to still get them to bite a jig, I'm going to try it. So I'm going to go through my jigs real quick, and then I'm going to kind of give you the downsides of this jig. If you're swapping from your normal full-size jig and you want to try some of these tungsten jigs, how it's going to change. Because tungsten jig, very small, very compact. They're putting bigger hooks on those tungsten jigs, but they still have relatively smaller hooks compared to some of these big meat gaffs. So, okay. So let's go to the horizontal line ties real quick whenever I'm flipping. So I like a Matt Herron. This is an old Aikens jig. Dirty Jigs makes it now. I like the angle of the line tie. These are the 3 sizes. I like all of them. So there is the 5/8. That's going to be more so in the summer months, hotter water. There's the half. This is a good all-around jig, and you can really slow down or speed up the fall of this 1/2 ounce with the trailer. And then the 3/8. 3/8 for me is going to be a cold water jig, or anytime I'm shallower than like 3 feet and I don't want those fish just picking it up off the bottom. I will typically put a Rage Menace grub on these 1/2 ounce and 5/8 jigs, but when I'm down with this smaller jig, it's typically a Big Salty. Now I will put Big Salties on the bigger jig, but this 3/8 ounce jig falls so slow, I don't really think the Menace grub kicks and does what it's supposed to do because of how slow that rate of fall is. Why I say all this is I think when you're fishing something slow on the bottom, the lead jig is going to be the deal. So if you catch most of your fish slow on the bottom, you're just shaking it, lead for me. Now, I will also downsize to a finesse jig with the same horizontal line tie. This is a ball head. I just feel like a ball head is a good all-around fish catching jig, not only just on stumps and wood where the fish may be really hunkered down on that cover, but if I have to cast it around a little bit too, maybe it's just not wood targets I'm throwing at, maybe there's some rock, maybe there's some other things. So I do throw this. This is a War Eagle heavy finesse. I like it because it has a 3/0 flipping hook in it. So I'm always looking for something with a bigger hook because I don't want to throw a jig out there and finally hook that 5-pounder and it come off because I bent my hook out. So the bigger hook to me is crucial. Now, when we get into the later parts of the year, May until the lake freezes over, grass is going to be a big deal on a lot of lakes. Now, I flip that grass. So before the fish really get up underneath it where you punch it, I like to flip that outside edge. This is a more vertical structure with grass growing on it. So the boat's going to be sitting out a little bit deeper. You're going to be flipping into the edge of the grass. Now, I've talked about this quite a bit, that this is a hero or zero technique. So what you'll run into a lot of times is you may have a really good practice. Something changes. Very small changes can ruin this bite. So the problem that you're going to run into is, let's say the water's cleared up. It went from being a foot of visibility to 2.5 feet of visibility. And really the only way to understand that this is happening is maybe you can now see the bottom. You can look in the water and see your jig a little bit longer. And to you, it should tell you something, but you have to figure this out quickly. So you fish the first hour, low light conditions, you can't really see your jig. Maybe you're not seeing the bottom. The fish are either gone because they left with the clearer water. And this is just one example, but this is something that will happen to you. They've left, they've followed that clear water out and they're roaming a little bit more. They're not near where you caught them. Again, this is in the late summer, fall time. So they're chasing bait most likely. Those fish have left. Now you flip this for the first hour. Okay, it's not a morning thing. This is an afternoon bite. Let them hunker down in that cover. You flip it for another hour, you don't get any bites. You flip it for another hour, you catch one small fish. Well, now 3 hours of your day is gone and you basically have ruined your whole day because it's going to be too late to go and try to figure out something else, especially since you have no idea where the fish are at. That's where I really like this tungsten jig. So this jig will catch you small fish, which isn't going to help you and isn't going to be super fun, but it will sometimes give you a clue as like, okay, maybe these fish have left. What does that small fish look like? Does he look like a healthy new fish that is pulled in? Or is this a resident fish? He's really dark. He's there, but all those fish that you were catching were really white. That could be enough of a sign to tell you, maybe I need to go do something else just for an hour and then see how that goes. And then we can come back to this jig thing. But as far as we think, our hypothesis is saying that the jig thing's going away just by the color of the fish. That's what this jig can tell you, that I don't necessarily always think the bigger jig is going to tell you, because you just don't catch those smaller fish on this bigger jig. So one thing I do like about this, catches big ones and it also catches the smaller ones, which are those clues. First flip, could be luck, probably luck. It wasn't coming off. That is the good part about fishing with a jig. Typically they're bigger than this, but they don't come off. When you're not getting any clues, something as little as the color of one fish can tell you a lot about where your day is going. So that is a big thing. Now I will say this, I like this jig because it does have a bigger hook than most of tungsten jigs I've thrown, but it's still a size or two smaller. So This is probably a 5/0 on that regular good old-fashioned lead 1-ounce flipping jig, and then this looks like either a 3/0 or a 4/0, and a little bit lighter diameter than your normal hack attack flipping jig, those big heavier duty grass jigs. So you may have to switch up your rod. Now I've been flipping this on the regular old meat stick that I've always flipped my bigger jigs on. It's almost an 8-foot heavy extra heavy rather action rod, and I've pulled the hook out of a couple fish's mouth. So why this is important is you have to realize that this smaller hook doesn't have as much bite. So what bite will determine most of the time is where you hook that fish inside their mouth. So when you're hooking fish with a bigger hook, a lot of times you will get them in the roof of their mouth, but the whole jig will be gone. That's great. That's gold. And when you look and you're fighting the fish and the whole jig is gone, as long as your line doesn't break, you can usually always boat flip those fish up to 4.5 pounds. A lot of times when I'm setting the hook and I'm fighting the fish in, this entire jig is hanging out of their mouth. The last thing I will mention, because I do feel like a Texas rig with a 3/4 or a 1-ounce weight on it is going to do similar things to this jig. And one of the big benefits of flipping a jig is that your hookup ratio is better. Well, if I'm talking about losing fish, then why don't we just flip a Texas rig? And I will say this is a much more simple option. With a Texas rig, you have a bobber stopper that could be flawed. Maybe it's went up and down your line a couple of times. You're gonna have to change the bobber stopper. Your weight can cut your line, and you're gonna have to cut it off, retie. So there's a lot there that isn't as efficient as the jig. Cut the jig off, tie it right back on. So the jig to me is still a major player. The Texas rig's still somewhat important, but I do think we're finding a good middle ground here with these tungsten jigs. Look at Beast Coast's jig selection. They've got a bunch of different tungsten jigs. This is the Lil Magnum, great for flipping submergent vegetation. That's where I've tried it so far. Eventually I'll do some more dock fishing with this jig, but so far it's just been grass for me. But as far as the couple weeks that I've had it, I'm a fan. It gets a lot of bites. Now I just got to figure out how to land more of those bites. So I'm going to change rods. We're going to change the line. We're going to go down to some 30-pound test braid. So far I've just used 50, which is fine, but you'll be amazed at how much of a difference the fall rate and how you hook fish with 30 to 50. So try a little bit less of a rod and a little bit lighter line, but try that jig. Try all of these jigs. If you really want to get into jig fishing, this is what I feel like you need for year-round jig fishing. Good luck to you, and I'll see you on the water.